You're watching Reason and Theology Live. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Many are confused by bishops who are openly expressing their opposition to the recent magisterial document on blessings called Fiducia Supplicans. Some Catholics are being misled because they trust that the bishops they're listening to have fairly and sufficiently researched the Catholic Church's teaching offered in its magisterial documents. However, this is sadly not the case, as I'll demonstrate. But first, I'd like to remind you, hit that subscribe button. Help me grow this channel. Now, I would like to interact with Bishop Strickland's evaluation of Fiducia Supplicans, the recent Vatican document on blessings. Let's start by taking a brief look at this clip from Bishop Strickland.
I mean, some have said, oh, well, this changes nothing. Well, if it changes nothing, why publish it? I mean, it's a major effort to write a new document coming from the Vatican. Why write something that says doesn't change anything? And then in this latest rebuttal from the prefect, he says, well, the only thing it really changes, and he's trying to dress it up and make it look so pretty, but it's not pretty. But he says what does change is different types of blessings. Blessing means asking God's benevolence to be bestowed on a person, a situation, bless a house, whatever. It's coming from God. What I read in this latest, I just read it quickly, but it basically is saying that if it's non-liturgical and non-ceremonial, yeah, we can bless sin. If it's liturgical and ceremonial, oh no, we can't bless sin. That's splitting hairs in a ridiculous way that doesn't really mean anything. A blessing, you can't bifurcate blessings into, well, there's this kind of blessing that can bless sin and acknowledge immoral activity, and there's another kind of blessing that's very holy and in the church.
Strickland depicts the Catholic Church's magisterium as saying, if it is non-liturgical and non-ceremonial, yeah, we can bless sin. If it is liturgical and ceremonial, however, we cannot bless sin. But this is simply not what the Catholic Church's magisterium is teaching. Compare what Bishop Strickland just said with what Fiducia Supplicans actually says. The Church does not have the power to impart blessings on unions of persons of the same sex. Therefore, those who invoke God's blessings through the Church are invited to strengthen their dispositions through faith, for which all things are possible, and to trust in the love that urges the observance of God's commandments. The Church has always considered only those sexual relations that are lived out within marriage to be morally licit. In such cases, a blessing may be imparted that not only has an ascending value, but also involves the invocation of a blessing that descends from God upon those who, recognizing themselves to be destitute and in need of His help, do not claim a legitimation of their own status. Far from approving of same-sex acts and blessing them, the Church says it cannot bless such unions, reiterating its 2021 decision, despite Bishop Strickland's claim that the Church has moved away from that 2021 decision. The document is clear that same-sex acts are sinful, and that they cannot in any way be given approval. Also compare what Bishop Strickland said with the clarification from the Vatican articulated by Cardinal Fernandez. It notes, the declaration contains a proposal for short and simple blessings, neither liturgical nor ritualized, of couples in irregular situations, but not of their unions, underlying that these are blessings without a liturgical format, which neither approve nor justify the situation in which these people find themselves. It also notes, this non-ritualized form of blessing, with the simplicity and brevity of its form, does not intend to justify anything that is not morally acceptable. Obviously, it is not a marriage, but equally, it is not an approval or ratification of anything either. It then notes, for this reason, in giving a blessing to two people who come together to ask for it spontaneously, We are not consecrating them, nor are we congratulating them, nor indeed are we approving that type of union. So again, to recap, Bishop Strickland falsely accuses both the document and the clarification of approving of blessing of same-sex unions and of the sin itself, as long as it's not liturgical, which again, as we've seen, is 100% false. Even in this non-liturgical setting, the relationship in the union is never approved. Bishop Strickland also asks, why write something if it doesn't change anything? This is not a really helpful question. It is as if Bishop Strickland thinks that every time the magisterium releases a document, it is changing something. If so, that would mean there are 2,000 years of documents from the magisterium that Bishop Strickland should be disputing on these grounds. Clearly, there are other reasons for the magisterium to release documents. What are some of these reasons? First, the document is a refutation of the German bishops and their proposals. The Germans have called for several things condemned by the Vatican in Fiducia Supplicans. These include liturgical rituals for same-sex blessings, the blessing of same-sex unions, i.e. the relationship itself, the view that homosexuality is no longer a sin. All three of these points have been explicitly rejected by Fiducia Supplicans. But doesn't the 2021 Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith Dubium sufficiently refute these things? Fiducia Supplicans itself responds to this objection. It notes, the above-mentioned responsum elicited numerous and varied reactions. Some welcomed the clarity of the document and its consistency with the Church's perennial teaching. Others did not share the negative response it gave to the question, or did not consider the formulation of its answer and the reasons provided in the attached explanatory note to be sufficiently clear. To meet the latter reaction with fraternal charity, it seems opportune to take up the theme again and offer a vision that draws together the doctrinal aspects with the pastoral ones in a coherent manner, because all religious teaching ultimately has to be reflected in the teacher's way of life, which awakens the assent of the heart by its nearness, love, and witness. In other words, Fiducia Supplicans helps people understand why the Church will always hold to the 2021 decision that the Church cannot bless sin, and therefore cannot bless unions of persons of the same sex. Also keep in mind that Cardinal Burke, among others, was asserting that the Church has moved away from its 2021 decision with Pope Francis's July response to another dubia. This was not true, but the false claim caused quite a stir, and it became necessary for the Church to once again reassert its 2021 decision, which it did in Fiducia Supplicans very explicitly. You will recall, back in October, people were saying the Church has opened the door to blessing same-sex unions. And this was a direct result of the dubia submitted by Cardinal Burke, among others. And again, it was Cardinal Burke asserting that the Church has moved away from its 2021 decision. So it was necessary for Fiducia Supplicans to be released to reaffirm the 2021 decision and to note once again the Church cannot bless unions of persons of the same sex. I'd also like to address Bishop Strickland's limited definition of blessings. He defined them as God's benevolence for a thing or a situation.
Blessing means asking God's benevolence to be bestowed on a person, a situation.
Now, this is one kind of blessing, but Fiducia Supplicans distinguishes its blessings from this kind. It notes the blessings in consideration in Fiducia Supplicans are not those of God's benevolence for a situation, but as the document says, these forms of blessing express a supplication that God may grant those aids that come from the impulses of His Spirit, what classical theology calls actual grace, so that human relationships may mature and grow in fidelity to the gospel, that they may be freed from their imperfections and frailties, and that they may express themselves in the ever-increasing dimension of the divine love. In other words, it is referring to blessings of supplication, not blessings of approval, which should be evident by the title of the document, Fiducia Supplicans. I'm amazed Bishop Strickland was not able to make this distinction, or at the very least, he was not willing to accept this distinction from Christ's teaching authority on earth with humility and docility. In other words, Fiducia Supplicans is not blessing relationships, but persons. And by blessing, it does not mean approval, but a supplication for grace to live a holier life. Now let's talk about whether the critics have really carefully considered the church's teaching on blessings. Bishop Strickland, by his own admission in this video, failed to read the Vatican's clarification document carefully, as he again admits.
What I read in this latest, I just read it quickly, but
sadly, he immediately reacted against this clarification with false accusations when he admits he did not even read it carefully. Unfortunately, this inhibited the faithful from celebrating Fiducia Supplicans as a reassertion of the 2021 CDF decision and a refutation of the German bishops. In fact, since figures like Bishop Strickland have conceded that Fiducia Supplicans gives the German bishops exactly what they want, it confirms the German bishops and others in the false narrative that they now have backing from the Vatican to bless sin and to bless same-sex unions. Now the Father James Martins of the world can claim they're in line with Fiducia Supplicans and therefore with the church when they bless the unions of same-sex couples. And the Bishop Stricklands of the world have confirmed that they now have the Vatican's blessings to do so. This is ground they should have never conceded to the devil. It should also be noted that Bishop Strickland presents Fernandez in the Vatican's clarifying document as attempting to make Fiducia Supplicans look pretty when it's anything but.
And then in this latest rebuttal from the prefect, he says, well, the only thing it really changes, and he's trying to dress it up and make it look so pretty, but it's not pretty.
The implication is that Fernandez is trying to wiggle out of the irredeemable position that the church has adopted with Fiducia Supplicans. It is amazing that he would resort to this extremely desperate position instead of just admitting he was wrong, especially when he admits he didn't read the document carefully. One also has to sincerely ask, has he read Fiducia Supplicans carefully? Rather than just admitting one's error, one desperately grasps at straws to a point that it would be comical if it weren't so destructive. From what we have seen so far, Bishop Strickland has not been able to successfully follow the basic concepts articulated by the magisterium on same-sex blessings. This is not new, and I've shown that Bishop Strickland has a long pattern of offering baseless criticisms against the magisterium for several years now, including his claim that Desiderio Desideravi contains teachings contrary to the dogmas of the Council of Trent, which is an accusation that the papal magisterium teaches heresy. The sad truth is Bishop Strickland has a history of falsely accusing the magisterium due to his inability to read the church's documents carefully and with an open heart and a spirit of humility and docility. Again, we saw that he noted that the church now allows for us to bless sin as long as it is not liturgical.
It basically is saying that if it's non-liturgical and non-ceremonial, yeah, we can bless sin.
Despite the fact that the church has repeatedly said in Fiducia Supplicans that it cannot bless sin or sinful unions, and that it is not validating anything of the sort. People wonder why the Vatican needed to clarify Fiducia Supplicans. This is exactly why. Because critics like Bishop Strickland have completely misrepresented what the Catholic Church's teaching is, and have created a significant amount of confusion. Thus, the Church has attempted to clean up the mess that the critics have created. I also think Bishop Strickland hasn't thought through his position carefully. Would he really have us believe that the magisterium now officially blesses sin, but the gates of hell have not practically prevailed against the teaching authority of the church? If the church's magisterium now officially blesses sin, then it is useless, as we would never be sure it hasn't already been compromised in numerous other instances. Who's to say that the Protestants were wrong? Who's to say the Eastern Orthodox or the Oriental Orthodox are wrong, if what Bishop Strickland says is true? And who is Bishop Strickland to judge the magisterium's evaluation of these blessings? If we get to be our own pope and sit in judgment of the magisterium, how are we different from the Protestant reformers who did this exact same thing? Lastly, Bishop Strickland's public dissent against the magisterium's teaching is a violation of Donum Veritatis, and per Pope Pius X, it is a grave sin to publicly oppose the decisions of the Roman congregations when they have been approved by the Pope, which Fiducia Supplicans was. I would encourage all to follow the magisterium and not a disgruntled bishop who exercises zero magisterial authority in the church today. It is the magisterium that has been promised to be led by the Holy Spirit with a special charism, even for its non-infallible acts. However, individual bishops with no magisterial authority have been given no such promise, and it is always dangerous to set oneself up as their own pope by sitting in judgment of Christ's teaching authority on earth. And by the way, I just want to remind you, make sure to hit that like button and especially the subscribe button. Help me grow this channel so I can reach more people with the content that you appreciate and enjoy from Reason and Theology. Are you a Catholic thinking about converting to Eastern Orthodoxy? Or are you a Protestant discerning whether or not to become Catholic or Eastern Orthodox? If so, I have the book just for you. It's called Answering Orthodoxy, and engages all of the arguments that Eastern Orthodox use against the Catholic Church. I respond to all of them. I show that they are in error, and in fact, they're inconsistent, because the things that Orthodox are objecting to are in fact found in their own tradition. So the fullness of the faith can only be found in the Catholic Church. Check out the book right now at shop.catholic.com for your copy today.